Okay, so today we'll get started with lesson one. And lesson one, you're going to go to the course content and you're going to download the OriginPro Basics 2019. Okay? So in this lesson, we'll essentially teach you how to import data out of a graph. Okay? So one thing to note, and we have to be very careful about this, is that if you are extracting data from any publication, it still needs to be acknowledged and cited. For example, data is replotted from Lee et al. And if you don't acknowledge it, it's considered plagiarism. Even if you redraw it, you still have to. Even if you redraw it, you still have to cite it. Okay. So let's go back up, and what you want to do is copy this picture, right? So just copy it, and so now it's at the clipboard. Right? Then go ahead and start up your Origin 2020 or whatever version you're using. And what we're going to do is we're going to import this photo directly into Origin Pro. Okay. So now you see you have a range of different workbooks that we can open. But for our purposes, we're just going to open up the blank workbook. So the first thing that comes up is this kind of little control screen. So in this case here, this is our little book one data, which we haven't put any data in there yet. But what we want to do is we're going to use a special little tool called the Digitizer. Right? So go ahead and open up this Digitizer app. Once that's open, you can rearrange here a little bit. So in the Digitizer, then go to File, and then you want to import from clipboard. So then essentially the image that's already in there will be directly put into this Digitizer here. Okay. So your image is now updated within here. And now we can work on getting the data out of there. So the first thing we can do is just work on getting this a little bigger for us to work with. So go ahead and expand that out. Now let's expand it out quite a bit. You can kind of see the different controls that are here within the Digitizer. So there's a number of ways to get the data out of this, but the first thing that we have to do is we have to calibrate the graph to the Digitizer. So to do this, we have to calibrate the x1, x2, y1, and y2 axes here. So you can see that they kind of have these kind of default values, 1 and 10, 1 and 10. We need to change that. So what we can say is, okay, we can choose what any type of data this is going to be. So for example, what we want to do here is move our x1, right? So if we move our x1 here, we can tap on this, and now you can kind of see it changed color here, almost colorless, but now it's essentially highlighted. So we can go ahead and move this, right? And we're going to want to move it directly to about 0. Get pretty close to it. And if you want, you can fine tune it just using your arrows on your keyboard. Put it there. Okay, so this one, this value, now we're going to set to 0. So double click on that and set that to 0. Now our x2, we're going to set that one. So let's go over and drag this one. So we're going to drag this to the value of 2 on our x-axis. Right? And go back over here and set this value to 2. Set this value to 2. Okay, so now the x-axis has been calibrated from 0 to 2. Now we need to do the same thing for our y-axis. So let's go down here and we'll move our first y1 down to 0. Okay. Again, we can fine tune that with the arrow keys. That's good enough for me. And we'll set that that y1 to 0. Now for the y2, we need to slide this, so you can choose any value you want. You can go from anywhere from 10 to 14. Any value would be good. I'm just going to leave mine here at 12 and set that value here to 12. There. Now our graph here has essentially been calibrated. Now we can essentially, within our defined region here, we can take off any value within this. So there's a number of ways to do this. We can manually pick the points. This would be the ideal way, especially if we had some type of scatter plot, if we wanted to take the individual points out of there. But since we have these nice, neat lines, there's a faster way to actually just trace the lines out of here. So the first one we'll just show you is just the manually pick points. So if you click on this guy here, then you see that our data line here, in this case line 1, has come up, and we can go over here, and then all you have to do is just kind of double click on this line, and we can pick points all the way across this. So you see every time we double click, we create a new data point, right? So we're not done with this operation until we hit done. So once you hit done, those data lines should then be imported directly into this line 1 data, and what you see here. So now we have 6 points with that line. But in this case, we can do a little faster method, and that we can actually do the whole trace, right? So what we'll do here is just delete this line, and we'll start over. So instead of doing the manual pick points, here we'll do what's called an auto trace. So let's go ahead and pick that. So auto trace comes on over here. And then you see in our magnifier here on the left, you can see that when our crosshair is directly over the line. As soon as it's directly over the line that we want, just double click that. Right? If it works, a bunch of red lines will show up. If it doesn't work, we have to try again. There we go. So now we've double clicked, the computer has read it, and now you can see that it's kind of outlined the entire line here. Okay? So this looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and click on done. All right. Oops, something went wrong. Let's try again. Auto trace line. Go ahead and double click on this line. There we go. Now it worked. So sometimes it doesn't work every time. Let me just go back and double click again. Okay, so now we're done. You can see the auto data is presented, and you can also see that essentially it's chosen 37 data points for us to work with. I see a little bit gap by the 0 point down here. So what I'm going to do is just add in one more manual data point directly to that. Okay. I click on there, and I go down. I use the kind of magnifier there, and I just kind of put one data point right near the axis. Not on the axis, but at least near it. Okay, so now it looks, I'm going to press done. I don't want any more data points. Right. Okay, now I've added that one extra data point. You can see now it says 38 data points. Okay. So now we can actually go take a look at this data if we want. If we go up here, and see where it says this one here, go to data. So if we click on that, right, our data should turn up, but right now it's buried underneath this line here. So let's just move this here. Let's put our data down here and organize this back here. So now we can see our data of where it's from, but look how it's kind of read it. It's kind of read it from the largest points in the x-axis down to the origin. So when we want to process this data, we want to make sure that it's always linear and in order. So it knows that sometimes it picks the data kind of funny. And so there's a little special function here to reorder the data. So just go over here, click back on our graph, and so bring back up the digitizer. And if we kind of see this screen up here where it says reorder points, click that once. Now suddenly our data is in descending order here, or ascending order. Okay. So that line is now done, but what we want to do is we want to make sure to label it. So let's label this one. And this line is 300 volt. Okay. So essentially that's all the data now that's in this 300 volt line. So what we have to do is make sure that we have a separate line of data for each one of these. Then there will be 3 independent data sets for each of these line functions. So in that case, we want to then go up and see we want a new line of data. Go ahead and click here. Right? So now it brings up a second line that then we have to fill in with the data. So I'm going to go ahead and relabel this now so I don't forget. And I'm going to call this 200 volt, or sorry, 150 volt. Okay, so there's 0 data points in there, so I'm just going to go do the auto trace function again. And we go down here. Again, we're going to try to double click on that line. It doesn't work, keep trying. Okay, so it didn't pick the data points perfectly this time, but what we can go and do is kind of add in the points that we don't want and delete the points that we don't want. So I'm just going to go ahead and press done. Okay. I'm going to delete this and see if we can just do it better a second time. Okay. So that data line is now deleted. Go back up, add another new line. Again, change the label. Let's go in and try to do auto trace again. Let's try going out here a little further. There we go. So that looks pretty good for our purposes of what we need. So I can go ahead and press done. Now, try again. Okay, so we got the kind of auto trace line there. Let's go ahead and click done. Now we got our second line. You can see the number of data points. Now we can improve this. So for example, I'm going to extend the line here and manually add some data points to the line. So we can go out here, go ahead and click on a few. We don't need a lot. Okay. So that's pretty good. And we also notice that we have a few extraneous data sets up here that are generated that we know is not really part of that line. So we're going to go ahead and just delete these. So press done. Now go over here and there'll be this button called delete points. So go ahead and click that. And then we're just going to draw a box around this where we want to delete the points. Okay, so I draw that box, it deleted those points. Now we kind of have a better fit of this line here. Now we can go ahead and start our third line. Okay. So first, remember we have to reorder. Again, it's not into ascending order here. So go ahead and reorder these points. And then, now that we have 32 data points, that line is done. So we'll go ahead and do our last line real quickly here. So add another line. Label it. Call it essentially 0 volts. Go back up to our auto trace and click on it. There we go. So our auto trace has worked. Go ahead and press done. And we're going to delete those extra points along the axis. Okay, those points are gone. Now we have to be sure to go and reorder these. Reorder data points. Okay, now that they're reordered, we essentially don't need the digitizer anymore. So you can either just close this or just go to data. All right. Now we can take a look at this. We can expand this out, make sure our data is all there. So now our data points are here and ready to go. So we can expand this, make it larger. And this kind of just gives an overview of data. Notice that it's already been automatically labeled in here. And we can go ahead and do a quick graph of this. So if you just click on the upper left pane here, it'll select all the data. And then you can go ahead and just click on a scatter plot down here. And it'll instantly give us our plot here. So we can go ahead and relabel this real quickly. So we know that this is shear stress, so we can relabel this. We know the units are Pascal. And this should always be at least 36 font. Graduate students always make their fonts too small. Old professors like us can't read it. Our x-axis should be the shear rate, which is always per second. Again, 36 font at the very least. Our axes should be at least 28 font. Right, so all you have to do is just click on them. You can move these as you like. So you can either go to Format, into the axes, and you can click on here to change the range, or you can just double click on the axis. And then we can change the scale. So let's just change the scale to negative 0.2 to 2.2. And at the same time, we can change the axis if we want to shear stress as well. But for the most part, 1 to 14 works. We have our legend here. Make sure our legend's always the right size so people can read it, at least 28. Then if we just double click on the data points themselves, we can recolor them as we like. So by default, it's always going to be what's called a dependent mode. So in this dependent mode, it'll just automatically apply symbols and automatically apply colors. If you want to change that, you have to change it out of the edit mode into independent. Then we can click on every single line and change as desired. So for example, let's say this one we want in terms of red. And we can have 150 in terms of green. And then we can have this one in terms of blue. And we press OK, and it instantly applies it to our graph. So that's how to get data out of any kind of manuscript, graph, or anything like that. This is the end of the first lesson. The next lesson we'll now learn on how to fit data equations to this.